Okay, good morning everyone. It's 9:30. Time for me to open the session of the Enfield Local Plan Examination. I'm sure you all know me by now, but I'm Stephen Lee, the Inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to examine the plan and report to the Council in due course. Obviously, we've all been here before. Welcome, Mr. Slack. So I don't think I need to go through any opening spiels or housekeeping matters. For the purposes of for politeness, completeness, and for those who may be watching at home, we'll just do introductions. Then we'll see if there are any matters arising, and then we'll go straight into it. I think you're here for URB 03, which is the first item on the agenda anyway, so we can do that quite quickly. So, Mr. Dale Harris, if we start with the introductions, please.
Good morning, sir. My name is Matthew Dale Harris. I'm a barrister instructed on behalf of the Council.
Good morning. My name is Michael Kennedy. I am Enfield's Urban Design and Heritage Manager. Thank you.
Ian Gillespie, Consultant, acting for LBE.
May Hope, Head of Strategic Planning and Design.
And I'm Andrew Lack, and I'm here today representing the Enfield Society.
Thank you, everyone. In terms of, are there any housekeeping matters? I think the, just for me, I don't know if you saw anything yesterday, Mr. Lack, but there's, the council issued a note to me, informal note to me on Friday afternoon. As you've seen before, I've asked them to update me or warn me of any changes there might have been since the publication of the hearing statement, which they did on Friday afternoon, but I wasn't around Friday and didn't see it until Monday night, so it's too late to publish anything. So apologies for that, but everything the council want to do can be discussed anyway, so there's no prejudice there. But it may be that it does overlap with the issues you're concerned about. So apologies for that. Well, not from me, I'm sure from the council. But there's no point raising that because we're going to go straight into that and you can explain the position. And I think on URB3, it's mainly about potential modifications. So I'll just cover it as I normally would. And where relevant, you can highlight the points, if that's okay. Are there any other matters arising?
So just one other matter. When we discussed ERB 01, the Brimsdown Sports Ground, yesterday, there's obviously some areas where further detail, further clarification is going to be needed from the council. So, and I think you indicate that you are going to be requiring further information. As mentioned, I mean, we obviously were raising 2 points. One on deliverability issues regarding the lease position. Note what you said on that, so in relation to indicating that in terms of whether that goes to overall deliverability or when it might fit within the plan period. And we also noted what you said about the need for the plan to set the vision. In relation to planning policy on open space, on reflection, so in discussion with the team, it seemed to us that a particular area where you might benefit from further information is in relation to whether the council considers that 103B of the NPPF can be met by the draft allocation as it stands. This being whether the re-provision of equivalent or better provision in terms of quantity and quality. Case law confirming that doesn't mean both quantity and quality independently. It's a planning judgment to be reached looking at the two things together. With that in mind, also having heard what was said in the session by other parties, I've asked officers to specifically look at that question, considering whether or not the 225 units proposed could be delivered whilst ensuring equivalent and better provision. And so that's something we propose to look at, and if it would be useful to you, sir, to respond it through a note on that. Independent really of our points on deliverability, but just because it seemed to us a pretty important part of the policy picture, and to consider whether there are any amendments in terms of either embedding the requirement for equivalent and better provision within the policy itself, and whether that would mean the number of units was sustainable or not sustainable. I just wanted to flag really that we propose to further investigate that and come back to you as soon as we can on that point.
Okay, thanks. So it may be that the council, after the discussion, so are you suggesting that after the discussion, and obviously what I was told in the hearing statement and so on and so forth, that the suggestion that the site should come out is to be looked at again? or
Well,
or to provide more justification for the site coming out if 103B can't be achieved?
Well, so to be honest, we want to follow the facts. So we need to look at that more carefully and see what's been said internally.
So open mind, basically.
Open mind, sir. And obviously we've got the deliverability points. Whether you think that goes to the overall standards, the allocation in the end will be for you. And we'll also reflect on what you've said while looking at that.
Okay, well, it would be helpful, I think, because I think 225 dwellings is not an insignificant number. I mean, it's not.
Yep.
It's not obviously in the same scale as some of the sites, but it's not insignificant. And so, and as we've said, obviously the starting point is the plan is sound. So if the site is, if your position is that you no longer consider it to be sound, then obviously there needs to be a good reason for that. And yeah, if there are still issues to resolve on that, then yes, and
Yes,
that
sir.
would be helpful. Clearly, as with all of these notes, and it is a risk that once, and it's a risk for the council to take on this, I suppose, to a certain degree, although I think that would be helpful for me, so I've got full information. There's a risk I'm going to have to reopen discussions, whether it be through written reps or a hearing session, if it's necessary for fairness and everything else. So,
of course, sir.
So there's always a potential for that. That's also the case for any notes that are coming through, and there's obviously an increasing list of those. But yeah, I think that would be helpful. Yes, great.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. All right, if there's nothing else, there's nothing from me. We'll move straight in then to URB 03, former Chase Farm Hospital. So my understanding is that there was a permission on it which has lapsed, perhaps. Yeah, well, first, as usual, starting point really is the status, where how it came about. Is there any permission on it under construction? If so, and so on and so forth. Yes. Mr. Kennedy, am I looking to you for that?
Thank you, sir. So the entirety of the site allocation, again, it's one of these historic outlines that's been gradually built out over the last decade. So originally the site was a large hospital, historic hospital. Majority of it has been demolished and a new hospital built on part of the site. As part of that outline, there was a requirement for a primary school and a secondary school, which has been delivered. Recently, I think opened this year, last year. And another part of the site was a 138 homes development, which has been completed, and that's included in our numbers as a kind of in the net figure. And then the remainder of the site is 344 for housing to be delivered, kind of around the remainder of the hospital. So there's some locally listed assets. There'll be some sensitive infill behind that of new residential, and then another residential element built to the east of the site, which has just been submitted for reserve matters application. That does actually propose 369 homes, so it's slightly above what we've accounted for here, but still within the outline, up to 500, I believe it was. So that's the current status that's being determined right now.
Thank you. Just sorry, bear with me 1 second. I'll just get your the modification document open, just because I don't think there are any mods on this, but I just want to double check. Right, just let me get. Where are you? He's looking there. So the 369 in the outline relates sorry, the 344 is what's left. As with some of these other schemes, it's the remaining phase, and the reserve matters applications come in would be for that remaining phase. So it would cover the rest of the
Exactly.
what's left. Yeah.
Exactly. So the entirety of the site is covered by. It's either completed or there's a live application to complete what's in the outline.
So if I can just jump in on that point. Obviously, we were talking about it yesterday in the context of the Alma estate and other sites. What's currently set out in the plan is, in terms of these urban sites, is pretty much, it's all, when we have numbers, it's about what's envisaged to come forwards in the plan period. So I think you've indicated that even for these urban sites, which unlike some of the site allocation policies where there is in the land use requirements, there are a specified number of homes, you'd like to see either an approximate or a minimum number of units specified in the land use requirements. It occurred to us, just thinking about this through, that one thing that will have to change for that to work is that when we have a land use requirement for the whole of a red line area, notwithstanding that most of it has been built out, that will have to be the total number of homes to be delivered across the red line area, I think, rather than just the additional number to be delivered during the plan period. Now, that's obviously different to how many we then expect to come forwards during the plan period. But there's a bit of because there are a number of sites where there obviously building going on site. We just need to make sure we've got a kind of consistent approach.
I think that's the main thing, is a consistent approach, and it's clear. I mean, I can say, again, it comes back to if you've got, so let's say, using round numbers, if this site was, we probably said, tell me what there was, say for argument, it's 1,000, 600 of those already built, there's one phase left that could accommodate 400. There's no point for the plan, in a way, saying, 1,000, because in a decision-making basis, it's what decisions are you making from this point on. You can only make a decision about the 400. So it may well be that somewhere it might want, for completeness and, be factually correct, that this site is delivering 1,000 dwellings, of which this policy or this requirement relates to the final phase. Again, it's not critical, it's just one of those things. If there was RJ relating to this, you could all explain all that in the RJ, couldn't you? And you could set it all out in prose and explain the situation. A bit more complicated this way. You've got to try and work out how to do it in sort of the tabular format that's been used, so it's a bit more complicated. I understand the point. It's something I need to think. I think let us think about that collectively.
Yes.
I mean, I do think land use requirements do need to, although policy H1 and I think E1 say that the tables in Appendix C are policy, I think elsewhere I've been told that, if you like, it's a bit of both. So land use requirement is policy, obviously infrastructure requirements and design principle are policies. That's why I've been keen to get the policy elements to be clear. And the tables are a bit, what do they really mean? So that's why I want some clarity. I think, again, so, yeah.
I suppose the risks are, it may not apply to this site because of, but if you have a red line boundary on a policy that shows 1,000 homes to be delivered across, or 600 homes to be delivered across this area, but what you actually mean is 600 within a portion of the site. It might be said that that's a barrier to delivery of the full number in that area, because someone will say, well, you could. There's no accounting for the rest of the site.
Somebody comes forward, so the idea is somebody come forward, well, here's 300.
You say, well, we've already got 300 on the site.
So, yeah. Okay.
Anyway,
there's a way, there's probably some way of reflecting that. Ultimately, it needs to be, I suppose it needs to be clear that you're expecting an additional, I suppose the total is this over the plan period, of which, footnote, brackets, as at 2024, 2025, 600 already been built, and the remaining phases, or we expect 400 of the remaining phases. Some reasonable words like that.
I just want to make clear we're alive to that point.
Good.
We're thinking about it.
And I think the other point I think is when you do, I think for these sorts of checks is what I don't know. You'll probably tell me now is where it's got, as well as replacement hospital facility and the 36,320 square metres of. Is that already built out, for example, in which case that needs to reflect, doesn't it? Because it's no longer an expectation from this point on that you're going to be wanting that 36,000 if it's already built. So it's getting that right. Some of this will be passage of time, and I understand that. The passage of time moved on, these things will change. Some of it, I suspect, is more, it was probably wrong in the first place and shouldn't have been expressed like that. But there'll be a mix and match up to that. Yeah. But as long as you're alive to that point, there's a general action, I think, for some of these things, just to try and ensure consistency and clarity. Because we've got situations where the land use requirements don't match with the tables, and there's probably good reason for that when you explain that it's gross and net, or that someone's already been built and so on. So it's a bit of a complex picture. As long as I sort of understand I'm making a note of all these things, so when I come to see the final schedule, I can hopefully make sense of it. I think. Just bear with me. So, I mean, I think in this case, 344, 369. I'm not going to, whether it's minimum or approximate or whatever. Then that's sort of, well, yes. If it says minimum 344, that's fine. If it says approximate 3, I think we can all agree that 369 is approximately 344. I don't think we're going to go worry too much about 15 dwellings or 25. Sorry, what would it be 25 dwellings? Yeah. So it may well be, if the hospital facility has been replaced, that comes out again. Is that the case? Would that line be deleted? Reference? Or is there still something left to build, or do you need to check?
As far as I know, the hospital has been, their plans have been implemented. There could be some additional subsidiary small buildings or something like that on the site, so we can double check that. But I think if that is not the case, that we would delete it.
Okay. The alternative, I suppose, is to change the red line.
Yeah.
And you remove the bits that are built out. That's the other alternative, and you make it absolutely clear what phases you're talking about. I understand this, again, because of passage of time and everything else, there'll be a reason, and they're probably from a sort of establishing the vision, and you can see a sense in putting the red line around the whole thing, because you want to show what you're doing across the whole and how it's. But actually, when it comes to decision making thing, does it become actually a pointless exercise, and you just say, you have a little blurb, say, this is the last phase. That could be the other way. For something as large as this, so it's a larger site, if it's sort of a smaller site like some of the estates, where I suppose if it's one of the estates where you've got little bits of infill across the piece, that might be quite difficult to do. Whereas if there's very clearly on a site like this one area which can be hived off and the rest is complete, then maybe that's the alternative. So I think there's ways. I mean, I think the point would be, if I was writing my report now, this probably isn't sound. However, the way in which you make it sound, there are alternatives.
Thank you, sir.
But it's up for you to think about in the further, then I'll see what you come up with. Okay, so in terms of delivery timescales, it's got an outline for the whole thing, and then there's a reserve matters in now, so that's some progress being made. I would say, would you count that 36344, 369, whatever it's going to be, in the 5-year supply? Would that be a 5-year supply sign?
Correct. Thank you.
And just thinking the practicalities of that, I mean, I don't know, you'll have some data on this about what's come forward on this site, if it's been built out, so you'll know annually what's coming forward. If you take the view that if it's reserve matters application in now, I mean, if it takes a year to deal with all that and discharge all the conditions and sort everything out, just to take argument, say then you've got 4 years of the 5 years left. Are you going to deliver 350 odd in 4 years? Does that fit in with this? So basically the question is, some of it might be in the 5-year supply, but is it realistic to say all of it's going to be in the 5-year supply?
Yeah, I think it's the same, sir, as some of the sites we discussed yesterday, that it's likely to be split within the 5-year period and some beyond, and we'll pick that up in the updated trajectory.
So I don't know how many outlets there are, but it's 50 a year, then you're getting 200, aren't you, in the plan period? In the 5-year period, if you start in year 2. Also, perhaps this is something, this comes up every time we do this, when we do 5-year supply calculations. I'm just thinking again, jumping ahead to stage 3, is there probably going to need to be 2 5-year supply, because obviously we're in a period now. So if you count where we are as year 1, probably that calculation, say we're in that 5-year supply, but then of course it'd be logical, bear in mind about where the plan is likely to be adopted, to have a version which moves everything on a year and sees where we are there. Because by the time we get the report, we probably are going to move into the next year. So I've had this before where I kind of need 2 scenarios for the 5-year supply. But that's, so again, when you're coming up with your trajectory, bear that in mind. Okay. All right. I'll look at the policy issues. We've got no modification. As far as I can tell from your schedule, there are no suggested modifications. You'll come on to that momentarily, I'm sure. But my main issue, a lot of the points are by now quite familiar. So in the infrastructure requirements, I'm assuming these are what have come from the permission, and you may wish to check there isn't anything else outstanding that you want to put in there. Again, in the perhaps unlikely event that another application comes in that wants to revise things, you want to be able to fall back on I guess what's been agreed before. This one's another one where it talks about groundwater abstraction. So again, it's here in this, not in others. In terms of the design principles, must consider implications of the Thames water main running through the site. We know my views on that kind of wording. This is not the most critical of things, but if you're changing things anyway, I might suggest that you might want to look at D.
Sorry, we're looking at the same set.
Oh, sorry, I'm looking at... It's my mistake, I do apologise. I'm
sorry.
looking at the wrong piece of paper, looking at Cockfosters again. This is what happens when the document falls apart. And you can't see the... I do apologise. Right. We're looking at the right one now. Beg your pardon. So, but there are still no mods, so fine. So anyway, 1 to 5, yes. Or 1 to 4, sorry, in the infrastructure requirements. I guess should deliver primary care enabling school. I don't know if that will be the one that's already built out then. And should facilitate hospital to continue to future potential expansion. You might want to look at those again if they're already done. In terms of the, so now we're looking at the right design principles. Maximise retention of high-value trees, we've talked about that. I guess you'll know from your permissions what the situation is on that and whether it is maximising potential, or whether it is retaining them all. Do you think, again, there might be scope when you're talking about maximising the retention of existing high-value trees to achieve a certain objective? Because obviously somebody could come along and say, well, with one, if you've got a group of 10 high-value trees, however you define that, there's one left, we've maximised it. But you need to what end? So maximise them to do something, so at least you can judge whether or not it's achieving the outcome. Or it would be retain high-value trees, which is, if that's achievable. These things are not, again, critical. I think they are grey areas, I think, soundness, because I think, it's about effectiveness. I'm not convinced about how effective that form of words is. There's the normal stuff about overlooking, and we've got should minimise residential parking. Again, we've talked about that before. This is PTEL Zone 3, so it would allow a certain degree of parking. I don't know whether the council's intention or what it's allowed has been, in line with London Plan or gone for more stringent than London Plan. So that'll be for you to look at and see whether you need to make any reference to that. And then the one point that I think I did want to make, and I think you've picked up yourselves, is that the table refers to the immediate setting of the Trent Park Conservation Area. No, it doesn't. That's the wrong page again. Plummy neck. It refers to the 4 local heritage assets within the boundary, within the setting of the Clay Hill Conservation Area. So, and obviously my question was going to be anyway, well, there's no reference to any of this in the policy. And I picked up on a few of those yesterday where there's no sort of nothing highlighted. So I believe the councillors consequently, from what your note said, looked at this and...
Yes, sorry, and I think we shared that with you in that note the other day. We also informed the Enfield Society of that as well. Yeah, just as a heads up. So I guess through the examination process and precipitated by the Enfield Society's rep, we had a look at this again, and we did pick up that the 4 locally listed heritage assets, so the last remainder of the historic hospital, aren't picked up in this site allocation. They are actually on the map, but just not very prominent, and it's obvious that the person who drew the inset map hadn't properly taken those into account. However, they are actually retained and enhanced through the outline, and there was, not to prejudge the application, but they do remain and are part of the reserve matters application as well, and that's been part of the pre-app process as well. So we think it's just something to correct really on this diagram, just to provide extra clarity. And as well, I think Enfield Society suggested some wording, which obviously we've reviewed, but we would have to take that away and just come up with a correct form of words just to make sure we're capturing what needs to be captured.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a design principle.
Design principle, yeah.
Yeah.
The so are they, because it's not particularly clear, and obviously what I don't know necessarily from the inset map is which phase is left or where the outline is relates to. So I don't know obviously whether the 4 assets are within the red line of the application or just affected by it, but that might not be that important provided the policy. So, but would it be retain?
Yes,
Yeah.
so the intention always had, since it was, since the outline was agreed, that was always the intention for those to be retained. And just for your reference, if you look at the inset map, there's a kind of orange blob to the bottom left. That is roughly in front of one of the main kind of primary asset, which is this clock tower, and around that are some other buildings. So we just need to redraw that essentially, but it's illustrative only. But yeah, we just want to make sure that this site pro forma and allocation properly picks up on the intent of the local planning authority.
Okay. The other thing, now I've got to keep double checking that I'm looking at the same right piece of paper after two errors, and I'm not going to ask the council for a third copy of the plan. That's excessive, but I might have to find some way of getting it rebound again. Is that it does talk about it's located just outside of view 3, so within a protected viewing corridor. Again, we were talking about, there's a few yesterday where the table flagged up they were within view corridors, and therefore should the policy at least cross-reference to the view corridor, the relevant view corridor policy. This is just outside it, but again, if you felt it strongly enough to mention it, that if it has a bearing, it might be a moot point now, because the bits which are affected might be all in that's already been built out. I don't know. That's what I don't know. So again, whether or not for you for a internal consistency check is whether something needs to be referred to there. And of course, this is one where tall buildings are not considered acceptable, so there's no issue.
Yeah, correct.
No potential conflict there between the views. So that's fine. Okay, I think that's all I had. Just checking my scribbles to make sure there's nothing else. On B, I did notice this. This is just a bit of a novel one, I suppose, and again, it's probably come from the application. Maybe it should promote nature recovery strategy for areas along the boundaries. Nothing inherently problematic about that, but again, it's just one of the sort of novel one that's jumped out that I don't think is necessarily, referred. A lot of the sites don't have that sort of formal words. So I didn't know if that was again something that just was very specific to this. I mean, clearly from there'll be BNG anyway. There has to be now, and so BNG policy. So whether that line is adding, seeking more than BG3, I think your policy is on that, or the BNG policy, or whether it's something different, I don't know. It may just be again wanting to be a bit clear about that. If it's only doing what standard policy does, then I think with these things, maybe a cross-reference is helpful. If it's wanting to do more, then it needs to say more.
I think we can review that and make sure which is the best approach for that, and it's simpler and more consistent, the better.
Okay, Mr. Lack, have you anything? Are you now content?
Well, obviously, the Enfield Society welcomes the acknowledgement by the council that there was an omission within the inset map, and has taken on board the two infrastructure points that we raised in our hearing statement. Obviously, we wait to see the exact form of the wording, but yes, we do welcome that and thank the council for moving on that point. Just in a general point, though, on the overall allocation, I mean, it seems to us, reading it, that it was put together before the development of the site took place, because a lot of the design principles are very general to the whole site, and now of course the site is mostly constructed, and so I'm not entirely sure whether all of them are needed, unless of course it's envisaged within the life of the plan that the site will be redeveloped again. So whether the whole allocation could be simplified just to reduce it down as per the earlier discussions that were had around the remaining areas and the possibility of redrawing the boundaries and then redrafting the policy to reference those areas, I think that would make life a lot more straightforward, and I think that's what the Enfield Society would prefer to see. But on the general point about the heritage, yes, thank you very much for taking those points from our statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it's difficult for me to know exactly what of the design principles are moot now, if the world's moved on. Again, as part of your looking at this policy, I think it all flows back to looking at the land use requirement, doesn't it? And it sort of all flows from that. What is now expected left? And then seeing if the policy stacks up, if you're removing the references to the hospital, the primary care, enabling school, etc., etc. That might be. And then I think if the council if this is a situation where to resolve some of this potential confusion, redrawing the boundary to show what's left is suitable, and I guess, redrafting the policy to reflect that is probably not a bad idea, clearly. As I say, I don't think that will work for all of these sites, because some are infill opportunities that cover a wide area. You'd be having lots of little red lines, which doesn't make sense. But this sounds different. So again, justified inconsistency is a phrase I'm now going to use on a regular basis. So there are several actions on that, but I think mostly to just ensure clarity and effectiveness rather than principle.
Noted, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else on this? No? Thank you. Thank you for coming. Sorry if you've. It's been at least I wasn't aware they'd made you aware, so that's at least something. So thank you for that. That's good. Right. Thank you. Unless there's anything else, John, that one you want to raise?
No, sir. Thanks.
Okay. So we'll move on then to URB 4, which I understand from your note. I'm correct.
So being completed. This
It's been completed. Yeah. So. Yes. So yes. Okay. So there's no point discussing it any further then. If it's complete, then we can probably move on. I think the principle applies. I mean, absolutely no chance of this one coming forward. It's all done. So we'll move on then to URB 6. Interesting one. Been looking forward to this one. Again, I think I said this yesterday, just so going back to URB4, clearly they're still in the plan, so I think in terms of the trajectory, it's helpful it's got a permission, it might end up in your permission list, but for my purposes, it's better if it's shown in the allocations list, so even though it's complete, it might be deleted, at least I can see. I don't get
see how it's structured.
When I get a massive list of planning permission references, they're not always that, that helpful. I mean, if you do it that way round, as long as it's clear, planning. This is brackets. This is URB04. So it looks because that's when I start to get very confused. It gets very confused when you've got planning applications relate to allocations and they're kept separate.
It will be guided by the allocation.
Yeah. I think starting with the allocation, and if they have got in terms of the site with just URB3, if it's 1,000, again, I'm putting that figure out there, but if it's 1,000, then for the plan period, it would be 1,000. I don't want it necessarily. All the different applications, all the different reserve matters references that add up to that 1,000 in a different list. I want it to be subsumed within that allocation row. And then obviously made clear what's left to come. Sorry, if that's... it may be that before we get there we can see an example.
Okay.
Can advise. Right, so we've done that. So URB6. Now, I know the council has been working on a note. This came up in in week 1 of stage 2. I asked about this site. I asked about it in preliminary questions, actually. And then I asked about it again in the first week back in stage 2. And the council were going to go and sort of double check the situation. I know you've been preparing a note on that, which hasn't been finalised. So you'll just... Again, no one here, but for the purpose of anyone, explain the situation and what's going to be in that note. I guess I understand it's complete, but you can set out what's in that note. And then we can talk about the issues so this is a site, as my understanding is, it is in the green belt. The council are not seeking, at least obviously in terms of the submitted plan, to remove it from the green belt. And it has permission and it's under construction. So if you just want to walk me through...
I'll walk you through the stage. So it is in the green belt. There is, I think, an error in the inset map, which doesn't have the shading over, but we've checked the policies map, and yes, it is in the green belt. It's not proposed to be removed. In terms of, as you say, sorry, it's being built out. We've checked recently with Berkeley Homes, who are the developer. We understand apparently only 16 to 18 units are to be completed still. So although it's not yet completed, by the time the plan is, if it were the plan to be adopted, it's likely that it would have been completed by that point. The site's histories may be useful just for you to have a bit of the background. So it was identified as a major developed site in the Greenbelt through the core strategy in 2010. And there was a policy in the development management document, I think policy 89, in relation to that. There was then an application for planning permission that was granted in October 2017. And through that application, the GLA advice and then the officer's advice were both that the proposed development, so what is now being built out, had no greater impact on openness than the former university buildings that were being replaced. So it's right that, in fact, no very special circumstances case had to be made in relation to that development. It wasn't considered that there was a requirement to remove at that point. There is and the authority's position is essentially that it would be useful to keep it within the green belt, that it serves a purpose. It's that the area of the site continues to make a contribution to openness. It's essentially a similar contribution to openness that has been made for a long period of time, given the history of build development on the site. It is a reasonably complex site. There's a historic building which forms a kind of focal point. So there would be difficulties, I think, in terms of defining any new greenbelt boundary around it. There haven't been any representations from the landowner or the developer saying that they want the site to be removed from the greenbelt. And so for those reasons, the authority's position is that it is sound to keep the land within the greenbelt.
Okay. Okay, my understood. I think I suppose, bearing in mind it's got permission, it's been built out, it is what it is. So, you know, again, one question would be what is the consequence of leaving it in the green belt? And I suppose the main only consequence is that it places some restrictions on the residents or the dwellings that's built, which presumably were understood when the site was granted permission and so on and so forth. So there is no other. So I suppose, if I was to think about what are the exceptional circumstances for changing the green belt boundary there, it's not about it's not delivering any more housing or seeking to deliver any more housing. It would be just simply about providing a degree of flexibility for residents, which may or may not be considered exceptional.
So, and of course, I mean, green belt policy does contain some flexibility for existing residents. I appreciate it's a restrictive policy, but it's not a ban on any kind of changes.
It's not as if, I mean, yeah, there are examples, well, many examples, not least development which has been granted through very special circumstances where the green belt washes over them, and there are also historical things where washed over villages and so on and so forth. It's not unheard of, and it's not automatic, is it? It's not. I'm not saying it's an automatic. No, in fact, I think my question, if my question was originally, yes, is it in the green belt, and you know, is the council seeking to, or why hasn't the council sought to remove it? Give me an answer to that. But say it's not an automatic thing, is it? You grant permission for housing, therefore it comes out of the green belt. So that's okay in that respect. So thank you. Understood. I can take that away. And obviously, you're right, obviously the inset map does need to be amended accordingly. I think the reason probably things got a little confused. My original preliminary question probably should have been asked slightly differently, because I asked if the policies map was accurate, and the answer was yes, which technically is true, but things were not read between the lines there, I suppose. So if the policies map is accurate, but then I think I was so focused on what we had to deal with in stage one that I didn't drill down to that point. So.
Every now and again, so when an officer will answer a question late at night, they can tend towards
to be fair, when the inspector reads the answer and goes, fair enough, then it's accurate, and doesn't also register it himself until later on. He goes, yes, the question was the wrong question. So the answer was perfectly correct, but it was the wrong question to ask. Fine. Okay, so we'll look at, we'd go through the normal. So obviously, in terms of then, actually, going back to first principles on this, if there are only 16 to 18 dwellings left and they're under construction, is this akin to some of the other sites which are effectively complete? And we've talked about taking them out.
It's certainly very close to that situation. So, there is a distinction. I'm not sure if we're aware whether those 16 to 18 are themselves under construction or not. We've just been told that they haven't yet been completed. But so in reality, it seems very unlikely that this policy is going to have any effect, given how constrained the site is and how advanced the development is.
So can I just add to that in terms of our approach in the plan and the red line areas and how far development has already proceeded? There are certainly examples in other authorities where it has been beneficial still to have an overarching policy in terms of some of the design principles if future applications come in on those sites for infill development, for example, or trying to pick up an area that's already been identified as residual open space or whatever it might be. So some of these principles still may be relevant even after the current planning permission has been built out. And I don't think that applies to all sites, but potentially some of the larger sites, there may still be some benefit to the council of having that policy in place for any future applications that may come forward.
Okay. Here, though, obviously the quirk here is it's greenbelt. So what would be important to know here is if it says estimated capacity of 249, make sure I'm looking at the right one. I don't know, obviously, if that's what the permission is for. And it also says estimated capacity. So is it not a risk that if you allocate a site within the Greenbelt and you're not removing it from the Greenbelt, so you have the complication that Greenbelt policy still applies, obviously. But if you've actually said, and again, sake of, I don't know. I mean, if the says approximate estimated capacity, it's not beyond the realms of fantasy to come. They could come also it's approximate. So we've built 249, but actually we want to put another 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 into these gaps and do some infill or intensify, and they could argue, perhaps legitimately, that the policy allows for that because it's an approximate capacity. It's not up to limiting. It's not up to what was built out or what was granted. So you've got that slightly quirk, and then of course the policy again, as it stands, refers nowhere to the fact it's Greenbelt and the implications of it being Greenbelt. So I could understand that, what you've said there for some certain sites. Actually, I do wonder here, if you have an allocation for a housing site in the Greenbelt, which is still in the Greenbelt, could you be imbuing that with status that it doesn't really have anymore? Because this seems to me to in effect reflecting a permission. Once that permission's built out, I don't suppose the council is going to be particularly looking at infill development or looking at expanding that site or looking at anything else. It's done, and based on a very particular justification of the hospital as well. So,
yeah, I mean, this application was considered and determined under a slightly different national Greenbelt policy position, in terms of the view being taken that there was no greater impact on openness, whereas it's now the no substantial harm to openness test in the development management world. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that an application could come in at some point in the future. We don't know. We're not promoting it, sir, but that's a possibility.
Yeah, but sorry to interrupt. But then that would be dealt with through national policy or your Greenbelt policies, which refer back to national policy. So while I suppose the question would be, is there anything in the design principles here, bearing in mind the sites? So again, it might well be a case, a lot of these are so specific to the application that they effectively built out. They should have delivered the links and so on and so forth. Should have done the SUDs, should have done the cycle connections, should have created the primary refractive, should have had all the active frontages and so on and so forth. So I just wonder while I kind of understand the principle of what you're saying, and on some of the larger sites and regeneration sites, that might make some sense, but I can't help but think the quirk of this being in the Greenbelt and the implication that the council is supportive of housing development in the Greenbelt without this policy referring anywhere to any of the relevant tests is not necessarily justified or consistent with national policy. If you wanted to carry on promoting this as a housing site beyond what they've done, that's where I would be saying, well, why aren't you removing it from the Greenbelt then?
Yeah, that's certainly not the position. So we're not promoting it for more housing. It's just, this is an example, but it comes back to the point you were making earlier around ensuring that we're being consistent in all of these site pro formas. And I just think that on some of those design principles, they may be relevant to any future applications that come forward that aren't envisaged in this plan. And it's certainly been useful to councils elsewhere to still have on larger sites the overarching policy in a plan. So the original development is built out and then an applicant comes back in with a further application. Some of those design principles have still been applied and be useful to the council in determining an application. And maybe it's a job for the council to see if there are any of those principles that may still be helpful where we've got a site which is close to being built out, and is the view that the site should therefore be removed from the plan, or is it worthwhile keeping the allocation in the plan because there are still some principles that may be of benefit to any future applications that come in?
I think, okay, that might mean going back over some that you've already suggested taking out. Again, I've not told you to take them out. You've suggested taking them out. I said that there's several views on how this might work, and if there's a justification for keeping it in, then I've not heard it so far on the individual sites. I've just been told that they're built out, so no purpose. So I'm just going to get, maybe in this one we could look at. I don't know if this is you're saying. I don't know if you're saying that more generically when we throw others that fall into a category we might want to look at, or whether there's something specific here. But developments on the site should follow a landscape-led approach. Yes, everywhere should. Presumably should promote nature recovery strategy for areas along the boundaries. Well, actually, that's just going back to what we said before, so that's quite a generic one. Should promote more diverse and better connected habitats, quite generic. Should increase woodland cover. Well, that's not going to be relevant to infill or expansion or intensification or extensions. Should introduce SUDs running through the centre of the site and adjacent prime routes, presumably already done. Must promote pedestrian cycle connections through the site, presumably already done. Should provide perimeter blocks and mansion blocks, etc. Don't know. But your design policies, I would imagine, would cover that. And to be fair, that form of words is in pretty much every allocation, isn't it? I mean, it's some reference to mansion blocks or this sort of thing. It's not a this site specific issue. Should create active frontages, promoting passive surveillance. Again, it's fairly generic, but also presumably already done. Should provide parking on streets well integrated. Well, that's in your standard planning policy for parking. Must locate services, access for servicing from Snakes Lane, presumably already done. And must incorporate SUDs again. so yeah, I'm not seeing anything there which is so specific to this site. I mean, also it says tall buildings not suitable, which is fine, but again, DE6 would cover that because it's not covered by, unless the appendix washes over this area, which I don't think it does. So while I take the point, the question would be, would that actually, from based on what I've read there, would that actually apply? And if it's only six, I mean, if it's really, I mean, I guess maybe this is something for you to say. I mean, the action is going to be, are there sites? You're putting some toward me that where they're complete. Are there sites which are complete to the extent that they're no longer serving the policy no longer serves a purpose? If there are 16, some dwellings still to be built here and they're not actually under construction yet, then maybe that doesn't fall into. This doesn't. It's more my question to you really: is does this site fall into the category of it no longer serves a purpose? You may wish to go and review that. If it does, you can put that to me and you can leave it in. But on the face of it, this seems no different to a lot of the other allocations. Clearly, I would say, if this policy were to stay in, I find it, there's nothing about Greenbelt in here. And I think, at very least, it should refer back to Greenbelt policy. And we've had that point about the other Greenbelt, like the RUR 3, 6, 7 and 8, which are not being removed from the Greenbelt. There's no reference to Green. It's like you wouldn't know it was in the Greenbelt, which I think is an odd omission. Also here, just for completeness, if this site were to stay in, because it's got a policy serves purpose, it doesn't refer. There's heritage references to heritage in the heritage considerations, registered park and garden conservation area, non-designated assets, 2 heritage assets within the site, located within the conservation area and registered park and garden. So quite a lot of heritage issues and no mention of heritage in the policy at all. So again, it's a bit of an omission. And then, don't know if there are, subject, if you suggest any modifications, let me double check. Come on. Technical issues today. And yeah, I don't think there are any modifications suggested. So it would be again things like on parking, should provide parking on street as well integrated put around. There's nothing about parking standards or minimising park limited parking, that kind of thing. So again, there's 2 questions to this one. Is it serving a purpose? If it is, then there's internal consistency issues, Greenbelt issues to flag up, and so on. I think this is one Historic England objected as well, so, or at least made comment. So in some other cases where that's been the case, I think modifications have been put forward to try and address that, and they haven't here. So again, something you'd want to look at. Anyway, clearly the principle's been established, so clearly there's a way of which development has been able to proceed without causing unacceptable harm to heritage assets, but and clearly it would be picked up anyway. Obviously logically, if there's anything left to be developed, it would be in the 5-year supply. I'm sure.
Just on the numbers, so the permission is for 262 homes. We've got 249 allocated because the 12 or 13 were delivered just prior to the start of the plan period.
Yeah. And this goes back to the point you're making, really, doesn't it? Because clearly you don't want the developer to assume that there's scope for another 249 dwellings on that site. It's delivering 249 dwellings during the plan period, isn't it? And then nothing because it's already got permits. So it's a bit awkward one, I think. But yeah, I think that is the point. That's the clear point, particularly relevant here because of its status. It must not assume. Nobody must assume, and obviously the reality is you probably couldn't fit it on, and I understand all that. But nobody should assume that that's actually allocated for another 249 dwellings over and above what's already been built and or has permission. So yeah. So that's again, yeah. So that's where it all falls in. So really, as we stand today, it seems like the capacity is 16 to 18 dwellings, isn't it? And that's all that's left. So actually, it even falls now. Although there's no criticism here, but it now would fall below your threshold anyway for what is a suitable allocation, wouldn't it? Because it wouldn't actually be from this point on. It's not delivering the number of dwellings that would fall in. I mean, it was many. That's not a criticism. It's just that the world's moved on. So yeah. So I think it's something for you to think about there. I'm sure you'll come to a view.
Yeah, indeed. So. And I think it's probably one of those issues where I think as you've alluded, there are a number of different ways you can draft a plan. And the key thing is that there's consistency between the way it's addressed in different policies, because on any decision making in a development management situation, you'd read the plan as a whole, and the fact that one policy is expressed in this way and the other one's expressed in a different way could be significant. And so if we can close that down and have a clear approach, then that should hopefully resolve any issues.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, just trying to summarise the action, just to flog the horse. So council to consider whether or not the policy serves a purpose. If it does, then it obviously needs to be amended in the ways we've discussed, including the inset map. But,
Thanks, sir.
And the numbers. Okay, then I did do them more chronologically, didn't I? Yes. So we'll move on then to. URB 07, Sainsbury's Green Lanes. Before I do, just popped into my head while in terms of how today, obviously, the programme was originally set. There was a morning afternoon session. I think I indicated I was not going to do that because obviously no one's here, so we're just going to run through. So we'll have a break still normally around 11 o'clock and then see where we are. If that's all right, we'll see where we are when we get to around lunchtime and whether or not we have a late lunch or a short lunch in order to, and we can discuss that, what's best for everyone. I suspect we're not going to be here till 5 o'clock, but yeah, see what's better.
Thanks. So our team's all here, so we'll just take it as whatever speed.
I mean, if we get close to gets to 1 o'clock and we've only got a couple of sites left, it may be easy just to carry on.
But saying that kind of thing at this stage is
absolutely. Well,
very dangerous.
I would hope we've got through. My notes on these things have now gone rather than a page and a half of notes. They've gone down to sort of paragraphs. So it suggests we are now into the realms of familiarity and these things. So anyway, Sainsbury's Green Lanes. So we want another supermarket. So yeah, if you just start again, I think by now we start off with where we are with this one.
Thank you, sir. So this site was put forward through the call for sites, but at this stage there is no planning application or extant permission to redevelop the site. I guess just to talk about the capacity, we envisage this site as re-providing the, sorry, 1 second. Yes, the re-provision of the supermarket alongside those new homes. So that was worked out using a capacity, the typology assigned to the site with an assumption that the lower floors would be used for a supermarket. And that left out, so on the inset map there's a kind of green hatching, green area to be retained. That's essentially protected by quite a strong legal covenant or something similar to that. So essentially that part of the site is undevelopable. We did note your queries on, I guess, the feasibility of developing housing and a large-scale supermarket together. So we've done a bit of research just to find a precedent that best suited this site or any of the other sites, and we actually found one nearby. So it's the Smithfield Square development in Hornsey. It's in Sainsbury's as well. That includes, it's actually a very similar scaled site. It's about 2.1 hectares. This site is 2.36, and that removes the green part that we can't build on. And that site, the precedent I'm discussing, it provides 440 homes above a series of buildings, but mainly above a Sainsbury's, with the kind of service access and a kind of basement with a podium above it with a communal garden. It does have a large surface car park, which I think we probably want to try and find a way to design that out and maybe have something a bit more hidden. But I think that demonstrates that, you know, it's a very similar North London location as well. So we thought that was a useful precedent just to share with you, and happy to send that on as well, if appropriate.
I'll take your word for it. Okay, but no, it's helpful. Thank you. In terms of delivery, I'm assuming this one, from what we've said before, this would be pushed on. This would not be a 5-year supply site.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Then we'll just move on to the infrastructure issues, and just the computer keeps turning itself off, which is irritating me. Right, so in terms of infrastructure requirements, I think, you know, they're all these are 4 fairly normal things, and again, I've got nothing to say other than my general points about how we're going to deal with sill stuff. Highways, sorry, put highways to one side for a moment. I think points have been made about highways on this one, in particular, and to whether or not, you know, particular reps have been suggested that, you know, the site, you know, delivering this amount of housing with a supermarket would result in unacceptable highway issues. I mean, I know what the transport model's looked at in terms of strategic issues, but has there been any sort of local, you know, consideration of this? You know, any objection from your highways teams?
Nothing that's been noted in our evidence base, such as the HELA or around the site about the capacity, so there's been no restriction on that. I guess that any detailed look at the site would be handled during the development management process, and any mitigations that are needed would be proposed by our highways team, such as the CPZ, for instance.
And yeah, as you say, so your point would be that normal development management policies and the ability to carry out TAs and so on and so forth would Yeah.
Exactly.
And, yeah. And the numbers have been plugged in, haven't they, to the strategic transport model? So, you know, over a strategic level, they've been addressed. Here, again, I think this shows actually the value of, just on A, must retain existing open space and existing high-value trees. That obviously relates to what you've said about the covenant, which is fine. Again, I think it's quite useful. It shows that, you know, it may, where you've said must maximise and must retain, there's actually been, sounds horrible, there's been some thought gone into that. It's not, there has been some, you know, there's some logic behind those forms of words. It's not just random. So it's, this does sort of show that, and that's obviously quite a clear expectation. Most of the other things are your quite normal stuff about streetscape and connectivity. And here you do talk about, on J, decreasing building heights to the northeast of the site to address the sensitivity of existing grade 2 listed building. Just in terms, obviously, that's alluding to the reference to the grade 2 listed building and setting, and it's probably to say setting of other non-designated assets. But of course, that's not quite the same as the general heritage point that would be, you know, obviously ensuring, however, whatever form of words is used, but ensuring proper respect to heritage. Again, whether that's a cross-reference to relevant heritage policies, I don't know. What I did want to just double check in terms of capacity, it says tall buildings are not considered acceptable on this site. So you said you've looked at the typologies. I guess I was just going to query whether you could, you know, whether 368 dwellings without a tall building, bearing in mind what we've talked about on some of the other sites, and, you know, built, you know, housing above supermarkets, whether that was achievable. I guess you just want to double check the typology was a non-tall building typology, I suppose.
That's correct, and it is, yeah, we've assumed a 6-storey building here, which would sit below the threshold. And I think the example we talked about earlier, it provides more homes on a similar site, but it's slightly taller, but it's only 7 storeys. So I think that demonstrates to us that we can achieve these two uses on this site without the use of a tall building necessarily. And we wouldn't support it here anyway as part of the tall building strategy.
Okay, fine. Yeah, I just wanted to double check. In terms of L criteria now, we've obviously got now relatively standard suggested modification about parking. So this is PTAL 3. So again, if it is minimising parking in line with London plan policies, then that's fine. If it's, again, I think it's just, I say, avoiding any unintended consequence. If the idea was that actually it should be car free or car light or something more than, I can't remember what PTAL 3's, or of course, sorry, as well, and when you've updated the PTAL as well, whether that has any effect as well. So, yeah, we will see the outcome of that. It's fine. That's fine. Yeah, I have nothing else to say on that one, don't you think? I say there are, the actions on that are more generic actions about and heritage, perhaps, is the main one. So, then moving on to URB 08. Which is the Hoe, Eastfield, Cherry and Bouvier estates. So another estate regeneration. And again, I don't think there's any modifications to this one, but yeah, so whether or not there's any scheme for this and so on and so forth.
Sorry, I think you'll notice through the plan that there are quite a lot of sites that are similar to this in terms of, they're quite large site allocations. Sorry, just have some water. Sorry, I think I'm developing a cold from this process. Not just this. Yeah. That's much better, thank you. So yeah, you'll notice that there are a lot of big site allocations here that cover quite large Enfield-owned housing estates and proposed infill development. So these are different, obviously very different from the other allocations we looked at, except for the 4th Street estate we looked at for Errington Green. And obviously these are looking, it's not just a red line boundary where we might be able to apply quite specific policies. These are looking at a large area with lots of, trying to take that cumulative advantage of lots of little infill developments, and I guess fundamentally to try and coordinate that development in such a way that it's not just little windfall sites, but that we can win better public benefit for these housing estates, especially in terms of greening, improved parking facilities, in terms of upgrades to public realm, and trying to, I guess, encourage that development through identifying opportunities, but also, just giving people an expectation of how they could contribute to a wider vision. So it's worth just noting where these came from. It wasn't just the local plan team just coming up with ideas. So our housing and regeneration team, so that's part of the council, which is part of a housing department but looks kind of forward rather than just managing the estate. So identifying opportunities for redevelopment. In 2022, they carried out a quite comprehensive study of the borough's estate. So I think 184 estates of various sizes. So obviously, perhaps on this site, it would be something like the Cherry estate. It's just quite a small parcel. That report, essentially, that looked at all those opportunities were very wide range, so quite ambitious in many ways. So talking about rooftop extension, stuff like that. That proposed essentially a big report at the end, lots of infill, lots of capacity studies looking at individual sites. Some of these sites went into further detail with a master plan approach from our in-house architecture team. Other ones were just the kind of report from housing. But essentially this proposed a big list of potential infill sites. That was then taken and assessed by the local plan team through the HELA, and a lot of those numbers were revised down in the HELA. So I don't think we've published the information from housing, but that's the kind of what's backing up all these different allocations. So I guess just to talk about this one, maybe just to talk through the inset map to start with. We can see that there are 4 different distinct clusters on the map. There's a kind of orange dotted line, which might not be an orange dotted line, and that is demonstrating where those infill opportunities were identified through that process through housing and refined by the local plan team to not be as potentially challenging for the DM process to manage. That was all carried out end of 2022 and then fed into the HELA and into the capacity numbers. So yeah, as you can see, just to talk through that plan, it's looking at some quite modest, adding a bit extra onto a block, or perhaps a muse development around the back of a existing row of houses with some garages, or repurposing space which is currently used for kind of just green space that's not used for anything, or redundant car parking. And that, yeah, so I guess that's to kind of talk you through, I guess, not just this site, but a lot of the other sites that we'll discuss, and try to give you the picture of what thinking has gone into this. I'll just stop there.
It's very helpful. And in terms of that, though, so I think we did talk about this or mention this last week in relation to, or last time we were here, whenever that was, in relation to one of the estates, or some of the estates, is that they're not whether they are just obviously, yes, you say it's worked through. There's lots of people involved, but whether it's in the plan, whether that work is now still continuing, isn't it, in terms of delivery? So if there's a mechanism to take it forward, I think you did say that was happening. There was teams throughout the council who would sort of, so there's no permission, no scheme in place for this one perhaps, but there's people still working on it. It's not laying fallow, as it were.
I guess that is correct. There's a team looking at some sites for direct delivery, but and some sites for disposal as well. So some of these sites could potentially come forward as a private planning application by third party. But there is a team looking at these smaller sites in the council. They haven't shared with us a kind of master programme for how each single one of these infill sites will be developed. I believe that team has gone through a bit of change in the last year or so they're just kind of gearing up to that programme again. But we still think that these are really helpful allocations in terms of just giving that kind of direction of travel, but also saying that you have to, it's not just about your little site, you have to contribute to something wider. Yep.
Makes sense. In terms, obviously, this makes the delivery slightly not confused. It's more complicated, isn't it? So 200 might be estimated, approximate 240, but it's because it's scattered over a certain number of sites. Maybe its delivery a bit more uncertain. So again, I'm assuming it's currently down as what would be in the 5-year supply. I'm assuming there's not going to be any assumption that this is in the 5-year supply. So is that fair? Okay. So in terms of actions, we obviously know land use requirements will need just a little bit of tweaking to put the numbers in there, and we know about the infrastructure requirements being the general points on that. I don't know if the Albany Park River Restoration Flood Alleviation Scheme has come up before, but I've seen it referred to in some others as well, so we may well get to it. Again, I'm not sure where that's come from, but obviously, presumably, it would obviously developments would only be expected to contribute to the Albany Park River Restoration Flood Alleviation Scheme if it was justified. An application going forward. With lots of these little infill sites, it might be quite difficult to be absolute about any of that, scale and location and so on. So this is that classic case of where it's absolutely necessary to be putting in some caveat somewhere that doesn't give the wrong impression. So the 1 and 2 are very sort of generic. They're in every policy practically. So 3 is quite a obviously a local issue.
I'm sorry if I may. I think we take the point, just on this particular point, I believe that river restoration project has been completed since this was drafted. So, I mean, it's actually really nice if you want to visit on your travels. But yeah, perhaps we can strike that from the policy if it's been completed.
Yeah, well, I say it's not justified to keep it in, but in that respect, again, if the wording was changed to say somewhere along in the plan, redevelopment of the site, where justified should contribute to the Albany Park, blah, 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 well, of course, that wouldn't matter because it's never justified, will it? So it never be expected, but I suppose just for, if nothing else, for tidiness and avoidance of doubt, if it's absolutely not expected, then may as well take it out. That's fine. Obviously, this is strongly encouraged on A. That's fine. I guess no point on that. We've talked about those sorts of formal words. Doesn't hold anyone to anything. And then I have no other points really on this one. Other than again, well, I think this is the case. It's minimise residential parking. I'm assuming you say there's no suggested modification on that because TfL quite like minimise parking. So it's PTAL2. Again, it's just for your general point on parking consistency. And it does say that this site is adjacent to a designated, let's say it's adjacent to a designated and non-designated heritage asset. It doesn't say what they are. It's green. But they are there now. Of course, this is 4 different plots spread out over a wide area, so it's not very clear which of the 4 plots that relates to, or if it relates to all of them. But again, I would imagine that something in the design principles to reflect the heritage assets is probably useful. And again, just from a consistency point of view, I noticed no reference to living conditions which again seems quite particularly important to infill development, but it's also something you've picked up in other sites. So again, but these are more internal consistency issues as much as anything. We'll do one more and then have a break.
So, but just before we move on, one point on this. I understand a point that came up, I'm not sure in relation to which site, but in the earlier placemaking sessions, was about need for language which indicates, where you've got potentially a number of little independent things, something that indicates that the design principles and infrastructure requirements don't need to be met by every application. So some language along those lines. And we also thought potentially one thing that might be useful on this allocation is a reference to either a need for a project brief or a master plan, because with all of these individual plots across, the intention of having an allocation that covers these different areas is, as Mr. Kennedy explained, is to encourage a maximisation of benefits from across those areas. So at the moment, we've had other works being done essentially in house by the regen team. We wonder whether there also needs to be some net reference in the policy to a need for project brief / master plan. It doesn't necessarily need to be too tight, because the individual sites wouldn't fall within, they wouldn't exceed the threshold in SS2. So there wouldn't be a freestanding requirement for master planning.
SS2, because briefly threshold is
It's quite small, sir, but the individual applications could come forward here for 10 units, or it's 50 homes or 500 square metres is the threshold in SS2.
And that may not be the case by the time we get to an adopted plan, I imagine, because I've said this before.
Yes, there's an asterisk there.
Yeah, there's going to be there'll be an MIQ about whether it is justified to ask for a master plan for a scheme of 50 dwellings,
yes, sir.
Which will be 1 year of development, if that. So, yeah.
Well, that's noted, sir. But we think perhaps in relation to the.
But I do understand the point here in terms of
separate.
effectiveness. That might be justified, and actually, perhaps demonstrates how SS2 might need to be thought of less so much in terms of dwellings and floor space thresholds, and more about outcome and how something's going to be delivered. So is it more about number of dwellings and things, or is it more about how is it a phased approach? Is it multiple? That kind of thing. It's less of a blunt, shall we say, less of a blunt instrument, more of a nuanced tool. So yeah, I think that's a fair point. And again, I suppose if we can remember. I might ask you to remember, when we discuss SS2, that might be something that needs to be factored into SS2 to at least capture that kind of characteristic as well. That, again, it's the unintended consequence of missing out on something where it's, it'd really be ironic that something like this, where you could see the scope, the reason for having a master plan or a planning brief across the site, would get missed because SS2, because it fall below the brief for S2, but somebody who's put an outline application in for 51 dwellings on a single site, bit of backland, whatever, would be required to deliver a master plan. It's utterly pointless. So, yes, fair point. Okay, I'll bear that in mind. I'm content at this stage for you to draft a modification to that effect for me to see, so I can see how it would work.
Thank you, sir.
Actually, that's an opportune time, I think, to take a break. So if we come back at 11:15.
Sorry, I was just going to. We've got a team change after the next site, if that was relevant.
Okay, well, we'll do that one then, if that makes sense, and then we'll have a break then. Okay, so we'll go slightly above 11. All right, so we'll do Exeter Road Estate then. we are going to be in very good time today. Rest assured, I will not be twiddling my thumbs this afternoon. I'm sure you won't be either. So. Right. So I will just say one thing before you tell me the start of this, because it might be helpful. I did note immediately that under the existing use, this one says it's vacant land, but then it talks about replacement employment floor space. So that was a bit confusing. So, but from that point, at least you can explain the status of that one and perhaps factor that in.
Yes, so we picked up on that as well in preparation for the hearings, and there is no employment floor space on the site as currently stands.
So perhaps just as useful as there's essentially a little bit of a mismatch going on here. Yeah. So if you see, so the name of the site is given the allocation is given as Exeter Road Estate, but the address is land at former Wessex Hall building. There's the site that was promoted through the call for sites is what you see on the inset plan, and is land at former Wessex Hall building, and that is vacant land. That's the area on the red line, in the red line boundary. There was also, though, sir, an outline application which included the Essex Road Estate, which is to the north, but that hasn't been, well, Mr. Kennedy will have it all, the chapter and verse on that, but that hasn't been built out and there's not a call for sites entry on that. So we're going to have to make some corrections essentially to reflect the site that's shown in the inset map and described in the existing site information.
Okay, so in essence, it's not the Exeter Road Estate, it is the land at former Wessex Hall building. That should be the title of the allocation, is that? Or does, well, you tell me.
Yeah, so I guess what's happened here is that we have, as Mr. Dale Harris mentioned, an extant outline permission, which was granted a certificate of lawful development for its commencement in 2025. So that covers the site you have before you in detail as part of that outline. That was for 46 homes. That site has been affected by the second staircase issue. Sorry.
Outline permission is not 46 homes, is it?
No, sorry, it's a hybrid outline. Sorry, should have made that clear. Thanks, Mark.
So the outline is how many?
The outline is 129. So, and if you look at the bottom of the site allocation pro forma, there's a footnote saying the estimated number is based on that outline. Whereas the housing team, obviously the call for site submitted the detailed phase of that outline. So I think that's where the correction needs to come in there. It's just to reflect that what we're looking at here is just the detailed part of the application, which whilst it has been affected by the second staircase issue, we understand that an application is forthcoming to resolve that issue, meaning that the site would be able to be delivered this part of that site, and that the rest of the wider application site, which is the outline, which isn't, sorry, slightly confusing, isn't in that red line, it's to the north of it. That proposed quite substantial retrofit, so rooftop extension and infill, as well as some adjustments to the existing tower blocks and infrastructure changes around that, which were found to just, well, partially to be unviable at the time, but also emergent structural issues of those buildings, meaning that those, not just financially unviable, but kind of, you can't build it because of physics. We understand the housing team is also looking at that site, that portion of the site again, and that there's a range of potential numbers of homes that could be delivered through that, and it's very much all the options are on the table at that stage. So essentially, to summarise, we have the detailed phase, which can be resolved through this amendment, which is what should be covered there under 46 homes, and what should be in the site allocation, and then there's a potential for something else on the rest of the site, which isn't in the red line of this allocation. It's quite a lot of context there.
Yeah, we should have had the break, shouldn't we? Yeah. Okay, that's a little, yeah. I mean, there's no requirement for for the allocation to follow the red lines of applications and so on and so forth. That, we're going to have a discussion about windfall. Well, it's not a windfall because it's got permission. So presumably, if you take out an outline, it's still be in the trajectory somewhere along those. If you're not, although if you're not putting numbers next to it because you don't think they're going to come forward, it's all very confusing. But are you just to understand the context? But are you suggesting any changes are needed other than making sure that the numbers are accurate and the site description is accurate? Are you suggesting to me a change to the red line of the allocation? I don't think so from what you just said, no?
No, I don't think so. So I think we probably need to change the name, keep the site allocation. We'll need to amend the land use requirements to take out the replacement employment floor space, and the number will be 46. So it's essentially an allocation to reflect that detailed area.
Okay. Yeah. And that's, although it's got detailed permission, oh no, that's been caught by the second, so it can't be built out as it stands. So
there will have to be another permission.
Okay. So the policy would could serve a purpose, and it could be. So just in terms of capacity, obviously basing it's 46 based on the extant permission. Does that seem like using your normal approach to capacity is like the logical figure to be pegging? It's not ridiculously below what you would expect or above?
No, so I believe the approach on this site will be to reduce the number of floors by 1, and then reconfigure flats within. So there might be a difference of 1 or below 10, plus or minus, probably minus. But
and tall buildings aren't accepted. So it's not as if you could, in theory, increase the capacity to 100 or whatever it would be, because you've got a constraint, limited. Obviously, it's limited in size, limited in.
Exactly.
I also know that some of it's MOL as well, which seemingly,
yes.
Well, yes, if I've understood it.
Yes, to the east, outside of the development area.
So, right. Well, let me just make sure I bottomed out on my note where we are with the numbers. So, so that obviously needs to be reflected in the plan and the trajectory. The change to LUR. Right, so then, yes, if part of the site is in, or part of the allocation is in metropolitan open land, it does, to be fair, the policy does say must retain that. So that's one thing, but I suppose the question is, well, why is the again, rather like when I was saying, if you're putting allocations in Greenbelt or sinks or things, well, why not just, redraw the red line to avoid the MOL so there's no doubt. Is there a reason the allocation needs to go into the MOL?
So I guess if you look at the red line, it's clear that it is just they've taken the chunk out of the wider outline, and part of that application secured substantial improvements to the landscape in that part of MOL, which is in the set allocation, and you can see the kind of dotted line on the inset map indicating improved pedestrian access and general improvements to the amenity of that space. Generally, the design principles and the inset map followed what was consented. So the outline, the red line there is trying to capture that concept of, yes, we want development on this non-MOL bit, but also some improvements to the directly adjacent MOL, the park.
Okay, thanks. Timescale, obviously, this was in the 0 to 5. It's not been built yet. Although it's not got, it has got detailed permission, but it would, at the moment, that detailed permission, there's evidence to say that won't be delivered. But would you still be looking to this one to be in the 5-year supply, given things are happening on it, and it's only 46 dwellings. So
I think so, given the number of dwellings, and that. From our knowledge, they're not proposing to make the building a higher risk building, which would require the building safety regulator approval process, which is taking up to 1 to 2 years at the moment. So, assuming that they can resolve the detailed application amendments, it should be quite straightforward, hopefully.
Okay, thank you. All right, that's that. So then just looking at my points on this, I believe that it is in an SPZ. So again, this is according to either DEA or Thames Water. Again, so it's just a consistency issue. The same point, if it's referred to, it should be referred to every time, or if it's always the alternative, just to not make that reference and have some generic policy which talks about SPZ, which I'm sure you've got. That's the way to look there. I think.
Apologies, sir. Are we looking at the same allocation again?
Yeah, your B09. Yeah, it's not referred to as being an SPZ.
Oh right.
Thames
Water.
Okay. Thames Water and or the EA have said it's an SPZ. That's the point. So there's a new suggested modification, which is now a standard point from TfL. So I don't need to cover that. I'll just advise on those. So that's just their normal comment about active travel, which I'm pretty sure could be dealt with by a generic policy if it's one that doesn't already exist about active travel. That's fine. So A is must retain existing MRL. So that's clear. Yeah, and anyway, if anything was into the MRL, there'd be other things. But I think by saying must retain existing MRL, that's pretty clear. And on H, it's just minimise overlooking. We know that there might be a better way of dealing with that, more effective way. And then we have parking. Sorry. And then standard-ish suggested modification on parking, about minimising parking. Although this one does say minimise parking. Must. Reference to the London plan, and this is PTAL2. So again, it'll be dependent on how what the council is content with on that. Whether content with PTAL2, subject to updating parking standards, and that's it. The only thing I think. No, that's covered there. There's no heritage issues. No. So that's me covered on that one. So again, there are obviously a few things on there that do need to be addressed, but largely tidying up, I think. So. Okay, thank you for that. We'll leave that then. So it's now, I'll call it 10 past. So if you come back at 1:30, and we'll move on. Thank you very much. We'll come back at 1:30. Thank you. URB 11, I think, which is the former Royal Chase Hotel. Just on this, I think the answer to this is pretty clear. But I'm now with respect, wanting to double check everything, where I'm not entirely sure. This is because this is a site that is the greenbelt wraps around it effectively, so it's a little thumb into the greenbelt. So I just wanted to be absolutely certain. I'm pretty sure the answer to this is no, but this is not in the greenbelt, and this is never was in the greenbelt, and not intended to be removed from the greenbelt.
That's correct. It's not in the greenbelt.
Yeah. That was my assumption, but should never assume. Okay, thank you. The other point is that sorry, this is under construction, isn't it? I think yeah. So I suppose the question is, this is the one that I've passed many times and can see from Chase Park when I've done site visits there. So I suppose the question is there anything left to deliver? Question mark.
Yes, so half the site, roughly 50-50 spatially, in terms of area. The site is consented for 64 homes and a 92-bed care home. The residential element, the 64 has been constructed. I believe it's Not sure if people moved in yet, but it's definitely been built, as you know. And the care home is awaiting commencement. Well, it's obviously hoarded off, and they've been submitting condition discharges and being discharged for materials, construction details, etc. So we believe that is underway, essentially.
Okay, thank you. So, I suppose if the care home element is not coming out of the ground yet necessarily, then there's still a chance this policy could be used, some revisions or so on.
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the numbers then, is estimated capacity of 115. Again, we've talked, so again, the numbers will have to reflect what's been built, what's still left to be built. If there may be nothing, but I suppose reflecting the, if all the housing has been built, then it's only the care home that's left, and I guess that, well, there's two questions there. One is, for sake of argument, the care home wasn't built, and an application came in for something that was normal housing, market housing. Would the council be amenable to that under this policy? If so, that might be fine, just as long as it's clear what that is. Or if it's no, the remainder must be a care home, then I guess that the policy would have to be clear that it's that the expectation is it's a care home. At the moment, of course, it's new homes, which could include older people's care, which might actually be fine. But I just want to make, again, it's making sure what the land use requirements set out is actually what the council is expecting expects to achieve on that site. So if it's, and again, making sure the numbers. So if the numbers estimated capacity of 115, sorry, my math, did you say 64 homes and 94 bed care homes? So is the care home element, does that count towards the housing? So manipulate it, so it's the equivalent of 100, it's the equivalent of whatever 64 gets to 115. Because I don't think the two things add up.
It is. I'm not sure of the calculation myself, but it would be translated as such.
So clearly, again, we're back into what we were talking about this morning about somehow reflecting that there's an element that's completed. So what's left, and what would that equate to? Again, I guess logically, it would be, well, whatever the remainder is after 115 with 64 taken from it, about 50. Then again, if you're accepting a pure housing scheme, somebody came forward with that as an alternative, would it be 50 dwellings or a care home? I guess would be whatever size they could accommodate. Okay, so in action there. I'm going to assume, well, I think it'd be reasonable to assume that you'd be expecting this to be part of the 5-year supply, whatever's remaining, and or what contribution the care home is making to. Is it? Sorry, it might say in the notes actually. It talks about older person's care home in the land use requirements. I think it talks about extra care. I'm right in saying that somewhere. I should provide an extra care facility with communal staff. So those two things are not necessarily the same, are they? Extra care is not necessarily a person's care home.
No,
so
we would have to clarify what it is that we're specifying there.
Does the thorny issue of whether extra care is C2 or C3, is that set out in? I mean, I can't remember off the top of my head whether it's set out in your relevant housing policy, or whether it's a case by case.
From memory, I'd have to check, sir, but from memory, I think it would be a case by case basis for the C2, C3 argument. We've got C2 on the permission. Thanks, Michael.
suppose from the wording of the land use requirement, if you're content for it to be, it could include older persons, specialist housing, then that is a broad church, and then I guess the criterion could be the same. And then if you're agnostic to the nature of that housing, and it could be extra care or something else, then
yeah, I think it's helpful to have that flexibility built into the policy. So yes, we'd be supportive of that.
Okay. Okay, so we know what, say, some actions there to tidy those things up. On to the infrastructure requirements. Sorry, computer keeps turning off. I need to check the. Yeah, there are no modifications for this one either. So just on terms of the infrastructure requirements, notwithstanding the fact this may all be moot by the time, it may never be triggered, but there is a permission. Those two infrastructure requirements are fairly standard and generic, so there's nothing specific there, I would say, specific to this site. So again, I guess it would be a question mark if there's something that came out of the application and permission that would be absolute for any further application. It might be worth adding that in for effectiveness. I mean, if they're generic things like contributions to what that is, but if it's something it's been very specific to that scheme, it may be worth highlighting. But no other particular point on infrastructure requirements. On G, you've got there's G and there's reference to extra care in G as well. So whether you want to alter that reference to extra care, although I just say such as an extra care building, but if it's not necessarily extra care, that's one thing. That's fine. Tall buildings not considered appropriate. Should provide an extra care facility. So we know I might just need to be. I know I is reflecting the permission, but again, it's what you're content to see if a different application came in. I mean, I suppose again, what we were talking about earlier, where there may be criteria which would have been relevant to the whole scheme, but now things have been built out. It's whether or not they serve purpose. So, for example, promoting clear views of the main entrance from the access on the Ridgeway. I mean, it might be that's still relevant, but if the way the site's been built out, that's already been achieved and is no longer relevant, then again, you could argue that if it's not unsound to have that. But again, if it changes a bit, it's making the policy, making sure it's serving that purpose. But again, that's for you to think about. Living conditions issue may still be relevant, I suppose. We've got nothing, again, in this one about parking standards. It does talk about locate on-street parking close to the main access, but nothing about parking levels. So again, internal consistency. There's nothing in the policy about heritage, albeit the heritage considerations do refer to some non-designated heritage assets in the vicinity. I mean, it doesn't suggest it's a major issue, but again, I guess if it was a factor that was taken into account with any application. I don't know here the extent to which, I mean, obviously there is the Trent Country Park is in the vicinity, and that might be what it's talking about there. I don't know if there's something specific, but whether it's so far away, or I mean, depending on where you're standing, you can see them in context, but and if it's only talking about a very minimal part of the site that's left, then maybe not an issue.
Yeah, noted. I think just having a look at our map, and the only thing nearby really is one thing in the fields to the west and the hospital site we were just discussing. So those buildings, which I guess is quite important. You've got, as you drive along the Ridgeway, you've got this kind of kinetic view moving down towards the city, and those assets are quite important in that. So I believe that's just talking about be mindful of your place inside that movement route. But yeah, noted that there's nothing in the design principles actually saying that.
Okay. again, probably not massively critical in this case because it may never be triggered. Yeah, so that's that point. Yeah, I suppose just to double check on I, because it does say should. I mean, if you change on I, should change the extra care facility to older people's specialist housing, or however you want to phrase it. It does say should provide. So again, that's actually quite. Even though it's not must, should is still, sounds like an expectation. Whereas if that's not, yes, if they're delivering that through their permission, that's great, and you might be quite content with that. But if there's no absolute reason it has to be older people's housing, and could be market housing, then I guess it could provide. But I think that's just in terms of effectiveness. That's for the council to determine what it's actually wanting to achieve.
Yeah, well, thank you, sir. We'll take that away and give it some consideration, but that does make sense to again, give it that flexibility.
Okay. I do note there were some representations made about this, which were so obviously aware that I'm aware of them, concerns about the principle of development, and I think they were concerned about the potential effect on, because it's near to the green belt and I think it was more inappropriate development or words to that effect. Just so obviously I'm aware of those reps, but clearly they are talking about implementing things in the future rather than so not a lot I can say or do about those. But I have seen them and had regard to them. Anything else on that one before we move on? No? Okay, thank you. So then move on to the Hertford Road estate. Hertford Road, etc. estate. I think, again, it seems similar to the one we were talking about just before the break. So.
Exactly, and I think what I said previously applies generally to these types of site allocation.
So, just first things first. It's talking about 199 dwellings which would be in the 5-year supply. Taking it that this would be pushed forward back. How are you looking at it? Would be a 10 years plus.
Oh, yeah, 10 years plus.
Yeah, and as I said last week, or last time I say a couple of weeks ago, I'm becoming very mindful of the number of things that are being shoved back. So, yeah, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Once I've seen the actual outcome. But it's
Noted, Inspector. Just to say we are too very aware of that, and we are having those conversations. So.
In terms of the land use requirements, yes, obviously that's that. New homes through infill probably give an indication of the scale. The infrastructure requirements, again, normal stuff on there. And I think I noted that Thames Water have referred to it being an SPZ, so that was that. And there are no other modifications suggested for things like active travel and so on and so forth, which is not necessarily a problem because we may not go down that route, but because it might not be needed on every single site. But I just noted there's a sort of a consistency issue there. Didn't know whether there was anything else that would be required. It'll all come out in the wash anyway. Nothing really. I mean, again, we are into the realms of like there's very little new stuff for me to raise on some of these. I guess your point you made earlier about master plan / planning brief would apply here as well. So I'll note that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes, and I think on this one we'll probably needs to be worked in with design principle A, or needs to be thought about how that fits together. Sorry, I didn't have my microphone on there. That probably needs to be thought about in connection with design principle A, and the reference to, if possible, strong encouragement for design and delivery in conjunction with the Moorfields health centre redevelopment.
Yes, Moorfield Health Centre, yeah. Yep. Right. Good. Say there are no modifications there. On I, talks about blocks up to 15 metres in height, and then buildings up to 80 metres height acceptable along Carter Hatch Lane, in principle, I guess. But again, so I suppose yesterday we had a discussion. I mean, again, you might tell me, I'm only now trying to pick out things where I just want to make sure that consistency and I understand the thinking. That there was a reference on one side and he said up to 21 metres, and you said, well, actually, no, that's not trying to encourage buildings of up to 21 metres, and it's really just trying to say tall buildings are not acceptable. So is this actually the same here? Really, it's not necessarily saying that blocks up to 15 or 18 metres would be like necessary or encouraged or required. Is it simply saying that tall buildings are not suitable here?
I think this design principle is trying to be more encouraging. So if you look at, so on the inset map, the area that's referring to along Carter Hatch Lane is the kind of southern cluster. And there's a, I guess, dotted line in orange of essentially lining that road and going down the railway to the south. And that's surrounding a existing tower block. So in that case, that is, well, because 18 metres is roughly 5 to 6 stories, depending on floor-to-ceiling heights and other bits and bobs. But essentially that's saying we would encourage development of that kind of scale to mediate between the street and that tower. So I think in this case it is trying to be more propositional than just saying don't do tall buildings, which in any case wouldn't be permitted in this area because it's not a tall building area. But again, that might be something that if we have this planning brief master plan being developed, that could be something that's fleshed out in that, and we already have a lot of that work, done by the work commissioned and completed by housing and assessed by the planning team and the HELA. So, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose if that works, which obviously not all of it or any of it's before me necessarily, but
Yeah,
not critical. But if that's tested different building heights, then like I said, but obviously from your policy, you've got again from my understanding of the policy, you've got 21 metres as your threshold. So there'd be not tall buildings and tall buildings. So here, I guess the question would be, why is it justified to limit? If okay, tall buildings are not acceptable. Doesn't say that. Some others do, but don't necessarily need to say that. But tall buildings aren't acceptable. Why would you necessarily say, well, limit it to 15 metres or 18 metres? Couldn't you test it up to 21? Unless to be fair, you've got something you've already tested that, and that's driven that.
So I think this would have come from that testing, and I guess it's been quite specific about where that height could be acceptable. I guess maybe the wording it is saying buildings of up to 18 metre are acceptable, which hasn't been tested for a planning application, so it's more of a could be acceptable.
Well, quite. I've scribbled in principle next to it.
Yeah.
Because but that's always because I'm very conscious of having these caveats in there to make sure everyone knows.
I think the intention of this design principle is to be helpful and encouraging to try and optimise our brownfield sites. But yeah, there definitely could be some rewording there, just so we're not saying that something's acceptable without having actually seen a proper proposal in front of us. But yes, I suppose those that number did come from that capacity work.
Okay. So you're saying then that, albeit it proposes that somebody has looked at whether 21 metres would be acceptable and it's determined that it probably wouldn't for some reason.
I would have to look at the exact detail.
And the other way, they've looked at 15 and 18 as a kind of broad scheme and gone, that would work, that could work.
Yep.
But that's different to saying what would be the impact of... Because I'm thinking about it, if you're seeking to limit development here, then is that justified, basically? So is it... Particularly in other places where you've not.
Yeah.
So, in places where you've said tall buildings are acceptable, logically, subject to the normal tests of impacts and character and appearance and so on, somebody could put an application in for a 20-metre building and you'd assess it on that basis.
Yeah.
So, but here, it's quite rare for you to be specific about heights below tall buildings. Usually, you've been specific about heights above tall buildings, tried to build below tall buildings. It's kind of like, well, it's just not tall buildings. So, I suppose I'm just trying to get to the bottom of, yes, it might have been tested as what, but has it been tested to say what is unacceptable?
I think we'd have to go into much more detail in that capacity study that was done. I'll have to look into that for you. But I think generally this might come up with these set allocations because there was that extra level of detailed work done and assessed as part of that. So I could imagine a conversation being had at that stage where a taller thing was proposed. But again, in our policy, over 21 metres is not considered appropriate as a blanket in this area. So, yeah. I think Mr. Dale Harris wants to say something.
Well, so I was just going to say, in terms of the operation of the policy, it seems to me that, yes, as drafted, it would establish in principle that a building of up to, just taking it alongside car-attached lanes, the example is, will establish up to 18 metres is acceptable. If a building has been considered by the council, I think Mr. Kenny is saying it has, and that's acceptable, then I don't think it necessarily is not necessarily a weakness that it doesn't say 19 metres and above is unacceptable. That's not what the council has established through its testing. Obviously, there's the tall buildings requirement, which has been assessed through a particular study. So, is there a problem if it's unclear what the position is between 18 and 21 metres? Well, that's something that the DM application can deal with. And as long as there's an evidential basis for the conclusion that buildings of up to 18 metres in height are acceptable in principle, I suggest it's probably fine as a policy.
You might know better than me to point to the authority. I'm sure there's some case law about where a policy says something is acceptable, whether it's automatically assumed that something outside that is unacceptable.
I don't think there's any general...
I remember an appeal.
Well, I'm sure there are lots of appeals, and there will be a lot of cases with similar sorts of... But unfortunately, the court's confirmed that it's always context-specific, so you always have to...
Yes, it may well have been that one particular case where a colleague, I think, said that because the policy didn't say... It said, this is acceptable, this is not acceptable, but didn't say the converse was unacceptable, so he allowed the converse. And then the courts held, no, the logic was that I think it's unacceptable. But I couldn't point to that authority, and
I'll have a search, sir.
And my recollection might be wrong, but that could well have been context specific anyway. So, and the specific wording of that policy.
It tends to be the approach.
So fine. If it's not, I suppose again, if it's not considered to be a problem, then I'm not. I can take that away with me. I'm not. Again, it's probably not something that's going to bring the plan down. And again, I think just in terms of, obviously, we've done parking to death. There's no suggested mod here, so no reference in the plan policy to the London plan. So again, to be, I guess, debating whether that is something that the council wants to, or thinks is necessary to ensure clarity about what standard is being applied. And I think there is some logic to that, because so it's either saying the London plan, so everyone knows it's clear that you're talking about those standards, or being clear that it's not the London plan, so it's something more than that. But we've done that. So again, the existing terms, I think I know on this one, there are references to adjacent Grade 2 listed almshouses to the south and locally listed Enfield Highway Library. Again, no particular reference, I don't think, to heritage that I could spot, and any specific design criteria that would seek to protect that. And again, I suppose, again, I can't, without going on site, necessarily understand the relationship between the 15-metre high building and the 80-metre high buildings and those assets. But if there is a relationship there, as you set out in other policies, I would ask the council whether or not it should be setting out similar perspectives here. And then again, that seems quite logical for these infill schemes. Consideration of living conditions of neighbours. It's not referred to here, but is elsewhere. So that's that on that one. So unless there's anything more on that, we'll move on. To I think another estate regeneration scheme, URB 14, Four Hills Estate. Quite a large area for not a very large number of dwellings, but I think it's the same, presumably for the, it's same points apply as previously, I guess, for these. So I'm going to assume, from what I've read, there's no particular scheme in place at the moment, a specific scheme or permission. So again, this is a 10-year plus scheme than
yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. Okay. The only points I've really got on this one are that J refers to pre-providing community use and associated public space along Brigadier Hill, but the land use requirements don't say anything about that in terms of its new homes through infill. It just says new homes. So no, nothing about re-providing community use or what that community use might be, or
apologies, sir, if I just have 1 second to look something up. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. So on the existing estate, so to the north of the site, there's a little orange blob and a dotted line going kind of with a kink in it. So that currently on that site, so that's proposing to essentially create a perimeter around this existing. There's essentially two tall buildings with a podium, car park in the middle. Most of that is exposed, so just like ramp access, blank frontages, but part of it does have a nursery on site just now. So that area there would be, from that, on the inset map, it would be showing that some kind of re-provision would be needed of that community use. So presumably that could be, it's just a single-storey building, so it could be something that happens in the basement, not basement, sorry, the ground floor of that infill, or it could be part of that design, or it could be relocated elsewhere onto that wider site allocation. Maybe there's somewhere more appropriate next to a park potentially. So that is what that particular novel policy is trying to achieve.
Okay. So the land use requirements.
Sorry. Yeah. Oh, sorry. So, thank you, Mr. Dale Harris just pointed out. Just across from that orange blob, we've got a kind of hatched triangle, which would suggest, given our key, that that would be a non-residential use. So potentially looking at relocating that there. But again, these inset maps are illustrative, so that could be that it comes forward as part of an infill site or something else.
Okay. I think obviously then that's reasonable. The land use, just again, partly consistency, but the new homes, or minimum of 99 new homes, approximate 99 new homes, through infill development and re-provision of non-residential uses where necessary, I guess, and I guess where necessary is fairly clear. Or you'll come up with some words, I'm sure, to make sure it's clear that you're talking about re-provision.
Re-provision of the existing.
Existing, yeah. Okay, so that makes J. That sort of makes sense of J. And then K is obviously normal parking issues. Okay. And then I think everything else on that one is it doesn't mean, because you've put a red line around the whole estate. I think on this one I did sort of note that if you look where the infill opportunities are, they are sort of focused around either side of that large green spine going down the middle. And then you've got quite a large area over to the east where there's, I suppose there are linkages and everything, but there's obviously no infill opportunities now. I guess I don't know whether that's important or not. Still, I guess it just reflects the entire estate. It's not saying that, I suppose the point is, if somebody were to come in with an infill opportunity in other parts of where they've not been identified in the orange dotted lines, it's not saying you can't do that, is it? So I suppose that's fair enough. That's reason.
Exactly, and I think we've got on the site allocation, see there's the kind of dotted lines indicating potential improvements to that public realm, which just observing on the map is probably not in the best condition. And then furthermore, there's the on the inset map, you can see there's a bit of it's cut out in a square shape. Just below that, there is actually a site just behind a kind of municipal-looking housing building, which I think has. Sorry, that would be a potential infill site there.
Right.
I'm just looking at it now, just thinking I've seen the site before with some kind of study on it, but the policy isn't saying you can't develop that there. But
yeah, fair enough.
Yes, I think just again, it feeds into the potential need for a master plan, because clearly, again, as Mr. Kennedy was saying, delivering cycle routes, public realm improvements in the rest of the estate is part of what the policy is trying to do. It's not just about delivering additional units, it's about improving the estates through this.
On the face of it, seems a logic to that, certainly. Sometimes you have to think about how you can make it necessary for soundness, that logic, but it's an effectiveness point, I think, if it comes down to it, isn't it? So, and particularly if SS2, as it's currently drafted, provides a bit of a gap, and I think it might be that thought either SS2 could be amended to refer to these. There's quite a few estate regeneration sites in the plan, isn't it? So some reference to those en masse is probably not, might well be helpful about, yeah, and then each allocation, a bit like the placemaking areas really, the PL policies do that, they put a big line around it and then have the allocations, the estate regeneration, some of the estates are within those placemaking areas, but those that aren't. And I guess just, if this hasn't already been said, there's a logic obviously going, the ones we've already talked about as well then, the placemaking area, the estate regeneration sites we've already talked about a couple of weeks ago, the same logic would apply to those, I guess, and retrospectively thinking about actions for those, adding the same wording for those if deemed relevant. I did say right at the start when we when we started at site 1, we've got site 100. I said by the time we get to site 100, there'll be things which are actually relevant to site 1, because as we all sit here and we think about different things naturally occur to us as we go through. So that's good, right? Oh, fine. So we've done that one then. We'll move on then to, sorry, we are getting through this extremely quickly. So again, well, another Kettering Road estate, another estate regeneration scheme. One thing I'll just pick up on this before we get into the status issues is that, and all that, the Reg 22 statement refers to the EA indicating that this site, sorry, I've looked at this, the EA reps actually, it refers to this area falling within flood zone 2 and flood zone 3. Your flood risk topic paper, I think I'm right, includes it as flood zone 1. And so it doesn't, it says it's sequentially preferable. Now, it may be then that you need to go and just check that. And if there's any additional work needed to bring the, I mean, obviously, I think it goes without saying that the council's position is that because all housing sites are needed, that practically any site suitable for housing is passed the sequential test as far as you're concerned.
Yeah, just to confirm, I do have it in front of me, sir. So it is in flood zone 1, so the pro forma is incorrect, and it did pass the sequential test, so sequentially preferable. So the conclusions on the sequential paper on page 14 are correct.
Okay, bear with me one sec.
Sorry, I'll get the document number. So it's E7.6.
E7.6, URB 15.
Page 14.
Yes. So, yeah, sorry. So URB 15 says it's flood zone 1.
Yep.
Sequentially preferable. I'm saying the EA's reps say it's flood zone 2 and 3.
So I think...
But have you confirmed they're wrong?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Matt, Mr. Kennedy.
Yeah, sorry.
So thank you, sir. I've just got the GIS file just now, and I suspect what might have happened, and we'll just double check the EA's rep as well, but if you overlay the flood zone 2 and 3 layer, which is basically just covers the river, Turkey Brook, which is to the direct south of the site, our site allocation overlaps that, so potentially that was how that was picked up. And obviously if you look in practice, it's just a drawing, it's an outcome of the drawing rather than necessarily something that would happen on site, because obviously we've got the bank to the river, and that flood zone 2 and 3 is very tightly drawn around the river boundary itself. Obviously it would still be a consideration because we're right next to it, but it's not flooding over the site or anything like that. It's very much a small little bit coming in.
Thank you, that's helpful. So, that's suggesting a slight overzealousness then on the part of the EA in identifying.
Slightly.
A high-level view.
Okay, maybe want to go and look at just for peace of mind. So I guess in terms of everything else we've talked about, this would fall into the same category, assuming no scheme in place, but something that's been looked at by the council more generally, identified as an opportunity. But would this be another one, albeit it's 90 dwellings, not a huge number, that would be 10 years plus?
Correct.
And I think literally now my only points on these are matters of consistency, really. So I think you've got living conditions and heritage, because it's near, again, it's an amber, but you just say nearby designated, non-designated assets. It's not clearly not suggesting this, but they are there. Maybe something that you want to reflect on in terms of design and layout, particularly as there are some potential for buildings of up to 15 metres. Although sometimes I suppose when you relate, again, 15 metres is what, 5 stories then? Are you saying 5 to 6 stories? I mean, I know it depends. I know it depends on things.
Yeah, I think 5 to 4, really,
Cool, yeah.
just depending on floor to ceiling heights, and yeah.
So it might well be that, again, when I go there, is that the character generally of what it's like?
So this site is, so we have this typology in Enfield in some estates, which is 2 towers with a podium car park between them. So it's, I'm not sure the exact story height of these, but plus 10.
Right.
And then a car park area between them. And what the infill opportunity that's been identified here is to essentially, decommission those car parks in the site. It's actually a similar approach to what was taken in the planning application for Exeter Road, which we discussed earlier. And I think generally, although we'd have to just double check what's happening on this site, generally those car parks aren't in use. They don't suit modern cars. There's a lot of antisocial behaviour, so I think generally the councils shut those down. So seeing those as surplus to requirement or potential for reopening, depending on the scheme, for instance. So yeah, if you go on site, what we're proposing here is something that steps up from the scale adjacent to the estate, which is kind of suburbia, terraced housing, and then creates more of a street-based estate here. And in terms of the heritage points, we'll definitely pick those up in the design principles as a consistency point. I think the 2 main heritage assets are, there's a listed building on grade 2 to the north. There's a little purple dot on the inset map. That's sitting on the high street, essentially. Can you see it? just at the very, very top.
Purple dot.
I've got it on mine.
Oh right. Oh sorry. I was looking.
You're looking in the site.
Yeah, top of the site. Yeah. Sorry. It's quite.
Yeah.
Distance, right, yeah.
And then further to the west, along the river, is the Turkey Street conservation area, which obviously this might affect the setting of. So I think these are being signposted as considerations for any development, but not necessarily big constraints on development.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, yeah, I'm sort of picking up where the plan highlights things. I'm not necessarily saying these are critical. Your knowledge is better. I just want to flag these things up to make sure that I'm not missing anything. You're not missing anything. And particularly, as it say, if the plan had said right at the start of this chapter or this appendix, all heritage issues will be dealt with by policy DE whatever, then I wouldn't, because they'll be dealt with by. I might say, well, is it likely you could accommodate a scheme without causing unacceptable harm? In this case, clearly there's quite a distance, so I'm not sure that in principle. Whereas obviously in some of the sites I've been told or have to go and assess whether or not it's impossible to deliver that form of development without causing unacceptable harm, and so they're different considerations. Thank you. The other points. No, I think there was the point. So living conditions, heritage, those sort of broad consistency issues, parking, all the things we know about. This one again, though, does talk about the Albany Park River restoration. So again, I don't know if that should be coming out.
Yes, sir. We will need to strike that out, given that it's completed.
Again, I guess the only other thing is, as you say, flooding is something that's going to be a factor because it's next to the watercourse, Turkey Brook, and so on. Again, in terms of internal consistency, I think is the extent to which that should be flagged. Flooding, of course, you're going to deal with it, but yeah, as we talked about earlier, it can raise issues. I think when these things aren't picked up everywhere, whether it's cross-reference simply to the policy. Okay, thank you. Right. And we move then on to URB 16. Um, 188 to 200 Bowes Road. And yeah, so I think there's reference to an extant permission here. So again, just understanding what the status is, please.
Thank you, sir. There has been a hybrid outline permission for 47 homes, in detail 351 square metres of employment floor space, and then 39 homes and 175 square metres of that floor space again in the outline. That was granted September 2021. But we haven't seen any commencement on site, so that seemed to have lapsed. Just doing a quick check on Google Maps to just check the history back to 2008. The site basically comprises a kind of like a hand car wash and a big plot of hard standing, and there's not been any discernible change on that site since 2008 on Google Maps. So we don't think anything's coming forward on that site. Obviously, we have those design principles and its capacity through that planning application, which was deemed acceptable. So we think it's a useful allocation to have, just in terms of, securing that number of homes and the design principles as well. But obviously, we would need to move the capacity further into the future.
86. 86.
Yep.
The splitting up between the 47 and 39, which is based on the permission, is sort of an artificial distinction, really, then. It would just be capacity of whatever those two.
Exactly. I think it's 86.
86. So, okay. And then the next question, I guess, and I don't know, is whether or not, again, I understand your basis on the permission, so it's whether the replacement floor space is a requirement or a could or a should, because, yeah, so. If it's a general principle that you replace the floor space you're losing, then okay.
Yes, we would want to replace the employment floor space that would be lost.
first mod we've had for a few. I just want to double check there's nothing novel in the mods. They're fairly standard. We've talked about a lot. No, I say this whole point about active travel modification. It's sort of been put in some and not in others, and and whether it's needed or not. So it needs a bit of a fundamental review, I think, from my point of view, to see how to proceed on that basis. I think this is one of the sites where it's been referred to by the Thames Water or the EA as a SPZ, being an SPZ. So again, just to flag up that inconsistency. The only thing, so presumably the building of up to 21 metres, because was it a building of up to that sort of scale? Is that why it's been flagged up here? Because it's quite a small site, isn't it? So I guess you need the height to get any sort of dwellings. Well, relative height. I know it's not a tall building, but yeah.
Yes, I can only assume that's from the application. I might need to just double check that if required. But at any rate, we're not allowing anything above 21 as part of our tall building policy. So yeah, then that would be subject to the testing and the DM process.
Sorry, just making some notes. Yeah, so I think we're again just in the realms of consistency here. It's the normal stuff. There's no reference to heritage. So there's no issue highlighted with heritage, so that's fine. But we don't have any reference to living conditions. Again, there are residential properties nearby. So again, maybe by the time we get to this, it might determine it's either where you've referred to it, take it out, because you don't need to refer to it because you've got all the policies, or rectify the inconsistency by putting it in. And it might be what's the least painful option. I don't know. But having sort of a mix. I mean, obviously, if living conditions aren't an issue, it's not an issue. But if they are, in some places, it's just one of those things, isn't it? So. Might be say what's the least pain to correct the issue. That might be the issue on parking as well. Who knows? Well, it might be a lot of that. It might be a lot of things where it's less painful to have. So anyway, that's to be determined.
Noted. Thank you. That's on my list for this afternoon.
I'm not saying that is the solution. I'm saying there's, obviously the first instance is my first role in this is to identify areas where there's soundness issues, and then give the council the opportunity to address them. And then after I've given you one or two goes, that's when I'll probably say no. That's what you're doing. But it's your plan after all, so you should have at least one go at saying how you want to deal with it. Right, okay, so then I think we'll move on then to, so the last one of the day, Main Avenue Estate. So I think we're into very familiar territory now. Oh, sorry, I need to, yes, no. So again, assuming, same things as before, no scheme in place, so you're looking to perhaps move this one forward, back?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, okay. And then we've got, so everything by now is extremely familiar. So the it's purely consistent. So there's maybe the master plan issue, if that's something the council wishes to put to me. There's parking isn't referred to at all in this one. So again, however way it's described, if parking is to be, I mean, if we start from the premise that parking is in the policy, there is reference to parking in each of these policies, then we'd assume parking would be referred to here as well. The table does refer to numerous non-designated heritage assets, and the value of existing 20th century housing will need further research, which is a slightly worrying concern. But again, there's no reference to that in the design principles, so particularly about how, if the value of the 20th century estate needs further assessment, how that's going to be factored into the decision-making process. However, can be assessed, at the end of the day, if these will be non-designated, if at worst, for want of a better word, they would be determined and assessed through the planning process, through the DM process, as a non-designated asset, then you can deal with that through your relevant policies. So, fine. But there's no reference to that at the moment.
And remembering, of course, the framework just requires non-designated assets to be taken into account, essentially.
Quite. So I guess it's just a slightly odd phrase for a local plan about needing further research, but the logic follows is an application comes in with a statement. They have to submit a statement, don't they, of significance and setting out what these. So those things can all be set out, and the importance of those assets and so on and so forth. So it's not a problem. I just want
Indeed, and it's probably inherent to any application that goes into an existing estate that some assessment will have to be made as part of that application of what is valuable, what is significant within it, and how to make sure that that is preserved, or if not, what the planning balance is in relation to it.
Quite. I think it's just one of these, when it's flagged up, it sort of alerts me to, okay, well, if you think that's important, then it's important, isn't it? And then say all the normal stuff about living conditions, heritage, parking, and so on. Tall buildings are not acceptable. It does say, I don't know if this is, the height must decrease to respond to the Bush Hill Primary School. So I don't know if the Bush Hill Primary School, that's because of sort of, issues with the operation of the primary school, whether that's actually a non-designated asset, I don't know. I mean, that's, again, for you'll know that better than I. And so that's all I have on that one. So that's been very quick. I do apologise. You never know how long something's going to. So maybe come up with these ideas, and I can't. I wouldn't have known that we'd have sorted out so many issues that become sort of standard quite so quickly, or that people would have dropped out, or the issues. So I do apologise. I mean, as I say, it's not unusual actually. Frankly, it's been unusual in this examination that we've done this, but it's usually the case that we do finish within good time. And some days there are often days like this where it's slightly unexpected. So apologies. If it wasn't for the fact I'd already said it out, we could have carried on. But I know also there's people from your side who are on leave tomorrow, or might not have worked out particularly well for you. As I said before, I'm always very conscious that set for a full day for this. It's only been half a day. But that's not to say that I'm not going to be busy doing stuff And it's helpful for me because it gives me opportunity to either work on stage 3 or go on site or write notes up from this stage or do all 3. So there is that opportunity. So is there anything else you need to raise with me before we break for the day?
No, sir, nothing further from the council.
Okay.
Thank you very much, sir.
Well, again, so slightly apologetic for the shortness of the date. Thank you. Obviously, your help has sped things up, so that's been very helpful. And we'll adjourn now then and return at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.